Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Delighted to kick off Securing Telecoms, UK TSA and Identity Security, which is a techUK webinar sponsored by CyberArk. My name is Sophie Greaves and I will be chairing today's discussion. We're going to touch on what the Telecom Security Act is, how it's impacting telecoms providers here in the UK, some practical steps on how to prepare for compliance, and more, I'm sure. We do very much welcome audience interaction today on our CyberArk webinar. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Please note that we're also recording today's webinar, and the plan is to finish up at around 12 o'clock, so in an hour's time. And so now we're really delighted to welcome our two speakers for today's webinar. First up, we have Oliver Broad, who is Solutions Engineering Manager at CyberArk, and also joined by Stuart Lyle, who is Senior Manager of Security Liaison and Industry Collaboration from BT. Enough from me. I'm going to hand over now to kick off. Oliver, are you okay to give us an overview of the TSA and how it's developed?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sophie. Pleasure to be here. So I would, like to take this opportunity just to give a quick view from, of course, the CyberArk perspective and set the scene. So hopefully you'll be able to see my slide in front of you. So where do we fit in to this story, and how can we help? So the NCSE, we're running an analysis of the telecommunications industry, particularly within the UK, and there's a more far-reaching review more globally with our partners. And that analysis was, of course, published a few years ago now. And that led to various thoughts on how the telecommunications operators could improve the standards of practice in terms of cybersecurity in order to improve things like resilience against attack and various other forms of disruption to telecommunications. And one of those factors was in the privileged access, so authentication, authorization for users within those networks and between those networks. So a number of operators were using CyberArk at the time of this analysis, and the NCSE had a thorough review of CyberArk, our way of doing things, research and development and so on, to query really what part we had to play in the much wider picture of the Telecoms Communications Act. And that led to, in part, some analysis before those engagements with CyberArk. And this image taken from the Code of Practice is one of those, the browse down architecture. And then there was also some comments made sort of after our interactions. And it's interesting to see that there are various ways that CyberArk can help, and that's in partnership with various other technology vendors, of course, and also education of users, training and so on, and the processes that are involved within the operators. Now, of course, following all these reviews, Ofcom were granted the powers to impress upon the operators to do certain assessment actions, and made a sort of legal mandate for them to respond to these questions in order to comply with the TSA. And on the back of that, the overarching comment that we would have is that privileged access management needs to be implemented throughout both the sort of secure telecommunication services part of the business, but also sort of corporate and business level, which in itself raise various questions as to, can these two things be achieved using perhaps a single instance of a PAM solution? Where do we draw the lines between OSS and BSS? And what I will say is that some of these questions are still up in the air, as are many things with the TSA. So CyberArk are here to provide guidance on how we can help as part of that wider picture. So there are a handful of common challenges that came out of the consultancy in 2022. And these are four that I'd like to highlight as potential topics for today. And I'm sure Stuart, Sophie, you'll have some more to add as well. And I'll leave it up just for a moment. But these are some of the things that I've been encountering talking to Tier 1 and Tier 2 operators as areas of perhaps ongoing concern, or where there may be room for clarity, shall we say. And those, I'm sure, are very common topics to those in the audience today. And while I can't guarantee that between us we will come to the singular answer for any one of these topics, hopefully I can provide some ideas and some best practices from CyberArk in how we can move towards them. So perhaps, Stuart, you'd like to comment at this stage?
Yeah, thanks. Look, totally agree with the common challenges that you've called out here. You know, we all know across the industry that pause is a unique challenge. I'll talk more about this later in some of my stuff, but my core principle on here is one of interoperability, right? We have to be able, as providers, to not only deploy privileged access workstations within our own organizations for our own workforce, which is a challenge in of itself, but also then to start looking across our very shared supply chain. You know, we have to make sure that, and I remember writing this in the consultation, it's on one of my slides in a bit. It is probably my overused phrase on privileged access workstations, but we have to avoid the scenario where, I always pick on Ericsson, sorry Ericsson people on the call if there are any, but we have to avoid the scenario where you have, you know, an Ericsson engineer carrying more pause devices for all of the operators that they service in the back of their van than they do spares to fix faults. You know, that's a fallacy. It's going to cause complexity. It's going to drive up cost. And we have to try and come up with, I believe anyway, solutions that are interoperable across our businesses and that allow that supply chain to flourish and continue to do what they do so well. National resilience, another one. Goodness me, don't get me started on national resilience. We will be here for the next hour. I think as an industry, we really have to sit down and talk about this one. I think it's challenging. I think it's a difficult piece of legislation to look at and go, oh yeah, that works. We can do that. That's fine. And I think, again, interoperability is at the heart of that as well. We're a very interconnected sector. And we need to make sure that we stay really coordinated on that national resilience piece.
Absolutely. And we're seeing much more in the national resilience side of things in the news. We're looking at the comments from the NCSE and partners just early last month regarding potential malevolent actors living off the land within telecommunications infrastructure and networks. And that's both aimed at the UK and outside of it. And as you say, as we're independent, there are benefits to that as well. Our partners in various organizations abroad and at home are all looking at this sort of collectively and collaboratively to see how can we address these challenges. I mean, CyberArk's view, both within telecommunications, but more broadly, has been that the threat of potential attackers being within an environment and being persistent within it and moving laterally within it is something that is a key challenge. Those who don't necessarily act to cause disruption immediately, but are gathering information in order to have an impact at a later date. So we see that at the digital level and also at the physical level, where CyberArk is less able to assist with things like the situation in the Red Sea, with cables and so on. We are an island and we are highly dependent on the undersea cables and other methods. So one of the questions is how far do we go with national resilience, and what can we do and what's within our control to try and meet these aims?
Oliver, I'll just chime in on that one if I may as well. We take a very threat-led approach to security operations within BT Group. We're very conscious of the top threat actors that are likely to cause us harm. We track them on a monthly basis, on a continual basis, and report on them on a monthly basis. And we've developed a cyber threat level internally that sort of puts the business onto anything from a sort of guarded state to an elevated state of awareness and response. The point I'm going to make here, though, is that, look, our top 10 threat actors within BT will, I'm sure, be very common to other providers in the sector, in that if you look at, your various bears and pandas groups across the APT sector, those of Russian and Chinese backing, they just want a foothold in UK telecoms, and they will do whatever they can do to achieve that foothold. If you don't believe you're being attacked or probed or looked at, wake up and smell the egg fried rice or the borscht, right? They're looking, and they will be looking for any foothold they can get. We have first-hand evidence of that, which we've shared with NCSC and partners. So yeah, you need to be keeping your eyes open and definitely being very aware of that threat.
Thank you. And you can see that these topics are interconnected. The majority of the attacks that we see within CyberArk are aimed not directly at the servers and the infrastructure themselves, the components that make up the backbone of the network, but they tend to start at the perimeter, which is typically the workstation, the end user device. I don't talk about perimeter in terms of firewalling and such in the traditional sense. And so that's why this pause topic is so essential. And what can we do to protect a device? And our view is that there isn't one vendor, one solution that will do that. However, some of the guidance from the code of practice is to ensure that you have the concept of least privilege on that workstation, on that device, such that someone can only do what they need to do and not more than that.
Cool.
That's of course guidance that it propagates more widely, but is particularly important when ultimately we have users who may have, with the best will in the world, not the greatest understanding or focus on cybersecurity. They've got a job to do. They may take shortcuts. We're all human, and so they will be the target of potential attacks to try and get onto that endpoint, discover what credentials, what further access they may be, and then to move laterally from that device or vertically into other parts of the network. So you mentioned having a van full of workstations. All of these need to be protected. Now, what I found interesting was a quote from this consultation done a couple of years ago, and I'll read it verbatim so I don't get it wrong. And that was that the code of practice was updated to clarify that a single device can connect to multiple networks where providers have granted relevant permissions. And I think it's a really interesting comment. In theory, you'd say, well, there we are. One workstation could do the trick, but relevant permissions. Where does that extend, and how can we achieve that using one device? Have you got any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, it's about, again, back to my point from earlier, it's interoperability. We have to be in a position where we can, yes, control who has access to what, and we're very well used to that. But I think that sort of fine-based access control within that gateway is something that we'll need to put more effort into and work into as we go forward. But yeah, a single point of entry is absolutely a desired state, and it kind of shouldn't matter whose device that is, as long as there's some sort of attestation or chain of trust that we can make back to prove that it's a trusted device, whatever that means. I kind of don't mind whether it's an Ericsson laptop, a Nokia laptop, a Fortinet laptop, or whoever it may be that's attaching to our network. As long as I can trust it and be confident that it's in a known state, I'm happy. And as long as I am confident that I can direct that engineer onwards to what they need to be doing in a controlled way and nothing else, again, I'm happy.
Thank you. And one of the common points that has come up in my interactions with the industry is the variance between tier one and other operators in terms of readiness and the resources that they can bring to bear to be aligned with the TSA and its comments. Of course, in your position, you may have quite a lot of resources at your disposal, and I know that you're doing a lot and have been doing a lot for some time. Perhaps what comments would you give to the other operators out there in terms of perhaps not reinventing the wheel, but looking to organisations that are doing this and are in a sort of more ready posture?
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. It's a good question. Maybe I could just do a bit of a screen share at this point, because I've got,
of course,
a bit of a sort of slide on this, which I think might be useful and relevant. Let me just make sure I'm doing this in the right way. This will do. So hopefully at this point you're seeing a slide that says BT perspectives. Could someone just confirm that for me?
Working for us, yeah. Thanks, Stu.
Okay, good. I shall come back to the presenter screen because I can see things a bit easier there. So look, I think there's a lot of noise around the TSA and a lot of you look at it and you go, oh God, this is massive and it's huge. And it is. It's a big piece of legislation. It's going to take a huge amount of effort to implement it over the timescales that we've got to implement it over. And I'm always very conscious that the code of practice is what the code of practice is today, but the legislation is designed in such a way that it's flexible. And I think we can all safely assume that the NCSC are very much thinking about version 2 of this in the background and what that might look like in a few years' time. So what I wanted to do was at least put up a couple of nuggets of truth, things that you can take away today that will hopefully help you in your journey towards compliance, and a couple of pitfalls to avoid as well, because I see a few people doing the pitfalls and that they're avoidable. So let's make sure we avoid them. Those nuggets of positive truth then. Look, I genuinely see TSA as an opportunity to improve. If we all go away and do this properly, it will absolutely improve the security of our sector. It will absolutely improve the security of our individual networks, and it will absolutely lead to better security and operations across our entire piece. It is important. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. Nothing in the TSA is redundant in my head. Some of it's really hard, some of it's quite audacious, but none of it's redundant. We're kind of finding that actually we're being able to use it as a bit of a lever to drive some positive change. So if I look, for instance, at the management plane requirements, being very transparent, we've had on our roadmap now a project for a few years about trying to collate all of our different management environments for our different networks across the piece into one single management environment to rule them all. It all sounds very Lord of the Rings, doesn't it? I promise it's not. But what we found is that by overlaying the TSA requirements on management plane, it makes sense for us to build one big new one, make it TSA compliant, and then over time on board on a sort of risk and scope based basis, our existing management networks into that new TSA compliant management plane. It's helped accelerate positive change, and we're really pleased with that. One of the things I definitely always call out, and I'm blessed, as Oliver has indicated, with more resources than many. I know BT is a big organisation, and we can throw resources at it, but we are still commercial. We still need to make money. But I've been really fortunate to have a fantastic program manager on this who has, really brought the team together in a fantastic way, got everyone aligned, everyone on the same page. We know what we're doing now, and we're driving forwards in a really positive way. And the other thing that I think is so important, and again, we're very lucky to have my Chief Networks and Security Officer, Howard Watson, acting as a sponsor for group. Having that really vocal senior figurehead at the top of the business saying, this is important, we need to do this, this is where we're going, especially when budgets start getting questioned and challenged, as they always do around starts of financial years, is super important. And the bit I would also call out, now that we've kind of done one and been there, I think there's a balance that we'll need to continue to strike over the next few years, particularly in those sort of first line teams that are working on stuff, between driving the improvements that we need to see in the next cohort of measures, and also being able to report back to Ofcom on what we're doing and how that's running. There's a sort of, a resource race between, I need you to be responding to a Section 135 and I need you to be, driving some work to actually meet the measures. Difficult one to balance, but I think really important that we keep an eye on that one. And then just a few pitfalls to avoid. And the top one for me, look, if you're kind of just starting out on your TSA journey, and if you are, why, where have you been, for heaven's sake? But if you are kind of just starting on that, the biggest thing I will call out, do not focus just on the measures in the code of practice. Yes, they are important. Yes, they form the foundation of what you will be directly asked by Ofcom. But it's really important to go and look at the rest of the code of practice. Section 2 contains a whole raft of goodness and context and explanation of where the measures have come from and what they really mean. So vital that you go and read that. And also do make sure you read the regulations too. There are a couple of things in the regulations that are not directly referenced in the code of practice. Regulation 11, for instance, which talks about ongoing security risk management, not directly referenced in the code. So make sure you're tuning into that. And look, events like this are great because it helps us not do things in isolation. The clue is in my job title, folks, industry collaboration. I am a very firm believer that TSA engagement and TSA compliance will be a team game. So, leverage the fact that Sophie is running the monthly sessions that techUK run. Talk to your peers, talk to tier ones, talk to whoever. Don't try and do this in isolation. It's hard. We've already spoken about the big mountains, so I won't labour on that point. And my final point, and I'm very acutely aware, Oliver, sorry, that I'm kind of on a vendor-sponsored webinar this morning, but I do have to call out this challenge that I do see in certain sectors of vendors claiming TSA compliance. Sorry, folks, not true. Vendors will never be TSA compliant. So please don't fall for the trick of a vendor saying that they can solve all your TSA problems and they are themselves compliant. They're not. If you ever get a vendor coming to you and saying, hey, we're TSA compliant, my advice is to ask them to prove it and see what they do. I don't think they can. My sort of next big piece on this, and this is sort of my bit of kind of just where we go next. the one thing you absolutely cannot and must not do, please, please don't bury your head in the sand. I have heard some tier twos before the code of practice was finalised say, oh, until it's finalised, I'm not even going to read it. Danger, Will Robinson, danger. Don't bury your heads in the sand, please, folks. It's not going to serve you well. This is real. It's happening. Ofcom are looking for reasons to enforce and to look at people who aren't replying to their information requests. Don't be the first one of those, please, and don't be the one that gets dragged through the courts by Ofcom. Certainly, please do not bury your heads in it. I will stop sharing at that point.
Nice. Thanks, Stu. Oliver, back to you.
Sure. And I'll just talk around without sharing additional slides for the moment. And I'd just like to echo the comments there from Stuart regarding TSA compliance and the vendor trap of here we are. Here is the golden solution, the silver bullet. CyberArk's view has always been that we can contribute and be what we view as an essential part of any organization's security, which is identity security. However, all cybersecurity must be achieved through layers. Depth of security is always the answer, whether we're talking about telecommunications, endpoint security, whatever it may be. There's very rarely a silver bullet in our industry, and it's certainly not CyberArk's position to say, here's our TSA solution, please take 3. It's more nuanced than that. So to sort of continue that conversation then, what sort of practical steps can we put in place to move towards a more confident position, shall we say, from a TSA and cybersecurity position? There are a number of capabilities that are highlighted that I'd like to touch on. And I did get some feedback that some of the slides I was sharing were a little bit on the blurry side. So I'll just talk around it rather than people squinting at their screens. So one of the key comments that, of course, aligns with ourselves and how we can help is that all privileged access should be logged. Now, that in itself is quite a broad topic. What defines privileged access in 2024? We've seen the blurring of the lines, excuse my phrasing there, but of where traditional privileged access management, that is SSH to a switch, RDP to a Windows server or application server that's essential for operations. That is, of course, a core part of what we must be looking at and controlling, but also the rise in prevalence of browser-based applications, SaaS, platform as a service, and where there are interactions between users who may not be considered privileged in the sort of day-to-day context, but once they access one of these platforms, maybe they go through single sign-on and have various business applications available to them, can they then access data or have controls that could impact the business in a more critical way? So CyberArk's view is we should consider all users, potentially privileged users, based on the conditions of their access. And so we recommend having controls for all the various different user groups that are within the business, both those classical IT engineers, but also third parties, contractors, maybe the workforce that have access to what may seem like more innocuous tools like the HR platform. There could be methods to extract data from that in order to gain further access elsewhere. So we encourage a sort of holistic view, and whichever sort of technologies and vendors you go with, it's important to Stuart's point, take a step back from the TSA points themselves and look at, okay, who are our users? What are the groups of users that we have? both employees, temporary contractors, third-party access, machines, developers, whatever it may be. What are they trying to access on the other side? And then what conditions do we want to put in place to improve our security posture and to feel more secure? I think, Stuart, if you've got to sort of comment on how you're implementing sort of a wider sort of cybersecurity stance in that respect, beyond sort of the TSA specifics. To put you on the spot there.
No, it's fine. It's a good question. Thanks, Oliver. I mean, look, as I said in my sort of bits of nuggets of positive truth, if you like, we've used TSA as a lever to try and drive, you know, some more positive uplift more widely across our business in terms of security. We're in the middle of a wider security transformation program. Identity management is one of the key themes within that. So, you know, we're looking at identity management more widely across the piece within BT, covering all of, you know, the factors that you just discussed. You know, in our case, clearly it's a massive own company workforce, but then when you start to apply, you know, contractors, subcons, you know, as you said, it starts to exponentially explode beyond that. So it's definitely something that we have to look at. You know, we're looking within corporate environment are going passwordless. A lot of our workforce have already done that. You know, strong move towards use of Microsoft Authenticator and things like that. You know, can't compromise a password you don't have. That's, you know, become a very key message for us. And we've got a lot of people now running with passwordless. So yeah, identity, you know, one of those really key pillars of not just the TSA, but also good security. So something that we're taking very seriously across all of our organisation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. Stu, I mean, I come to you on, you've obviously got a fantastic BT perspective, but I'm just interested as well in your role as kind of industry liaison, collaboration. Yeah. You mentioned the techUK event, so thank you for that plug. But interested to know kind of how industry is kind of reacting to the TSA kind of post-commencement, post the first info request from Ofcom.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm very fortunate in my role that I get to try and do a lot of talking across the business, and I'm very fortunate in working for BT that we're members of several sort of industry groups that help try and bring people together to solve some of this stuff. So just, you know, a few layers of that. We're on the Network Security Information Exchange, which is you know, a conglomeration of a lot of the big tier ones, some of the larger tier twos, NCSC, other players in the sector like Nominet. So we do, you know, a lot of really good collaboration in that space. Not so much on TSA these days because NCSC have, you know, not distanced themselves, but made it very clear that, you know, our compliance is our compliance, and they can't comment on the compliance or not of any given thing that we're doing, which is quite right. We're also driving a lot of collaboration now through the NICC standards security task group. So I will do a little plug for that, if I may. NICC standards is a UK body set up to develop interoperability standards, ways of working between UK operators technically. Excellent group. We've recently published ND 1448, Google it, on helping providers to try and interpret the terms public electronic communications networks and public electronic communications services, because that in itself, I think, is a fairly major challenge. And as you said, Sophie, look, you know, I'm going to big it up again. I think the TSA calls that techUK are running every month are a really useful talking shop to bring people together. I did have a slide on this. I'm not sharing it. On that slide, I had techUK therapy sessions crossed out and TSA calls after it. But I do think it's you know, look, we're all suffering a degree of pain on this, right? This isn't easy for anybody. As I said, you know, I'm super fortunate. I get to work for one of the big boys, and we can, you know, throw resources at it and make it happen. I'm acutely aware that will not be the same in a bunch of other organisations.
Yeah.
So, I think it's incumbent on us as tier ones, as larger players in the ecosystem to share and to try and lay some groundwork or some paths towards those interoperable solutions. So we've done the bit on scope. The security task group is currently doing some work on pause.
Okay.
So I would encourage anyone who is interested in engaging on the privileged access workstation debate to come and have a look at the NICC security task group. If you're not familiar with it, you can reach out to me after the call. Sophie is aware of contacts within NICC security as well. We can put you in touch with the secretary there. And if it's something that you're interested in driving the agenda on, we welcome anyone to come and play at NICC standards. There is a membership fee, but it's relatively modest. And hopefully you will get something out of it on the back.
Nice, thanks, Stu. Can I just pick up? We will come to more questions from the audience, which I see are coming in. So thank you in advance to all the attendees for getting involved there and typing out some questions in the comments. But Stu, just a quick one to go back to it, because you mentioned the NICC standards document on scope and definitions. And I think it's just really important to be clear, because there's a point here on vendors and their requirements to be compliant. But let's just be clear that vendors are not within the scope of the TSA. It's for the operators.
So the way that I always think of it, right? The only entities in this ecosystem that are nominally required to be compliant are the provider networks, your BTs, your VMO2s, your 3s, your whoever, right? Now, in my mind, we are the only entity that's asked questions by Ofcom. We are the only sort of entities that are likely to be fined by Ofcom. And I think it's perfectly valid for a vendor to say, hey, provider, we can help you on your journey towards compliance. I think that's great. What I don't think is appropriate or correct is for a vendor to say they are TSA compliant. How can let's pick on one. Sorry, Google on the call if you're on. How could Google turn around and go, hey, everyone, we're TSA compliant. How are you compliant to the measures on SIM cards, Google? You don't do them. It's just not relevant, right? So I think, look, I'm all for vendors saying, hey, BT, we can help you to be compliant on your journey. That's fabulous. I like that. Bring it on. Vendors that sort of run around going, we're TSA compliant. Sorry, prove it to me. Show me a certificate or a badge that says you are. I don't get a certificate or a badge that says that I am. How does a vendor get one, right? I'd love one. So yeah, for me, it's kind of like, it's that proof point piece to me. And I can see Les has asked a question. Les, happy to talk offline, mate. Les and I go a long way back, so happy days.
Thanks, Stu. And just, Oliver, to you as one of those kind of fantastic vendors who is working in close collaboration with those in scope, with the providers. Another questions that's come in, how are you working with your kind of partners and customers in providing solutions that can help them on their journeys? What experience have you got on that side?
Of course, and we've been working with a range of telecommunications organizations, large and small, for a number of years prior to the TSA, and of course ongoing, which has helped to give us the experience, say, okay, this is what works within this specific area for these particular organizations. And you do need to tailor the approach. Okay, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Identity security in particular, by its definition, is going to vary based on the risks posed and therefore the priorities of each of those organizations. And we're very much of the approach that there needs to be a fair amount of work. There's no way around it to understand the challenge that particular business has. And then we can use our experience to say, okay, here's how other organizations similar to yourselves have made these changes. And there are some things that are a bit scary, right? We might need to change certain workflows for people who have been doing things in a certain way for decades, perhaps,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So the only way to make those kinds of changes and to encourage those is to say, this is how we've done it before. This is how one of your cousins and siblings within the industry has done it. This is how they were successful and the benefits that it provided. And here's sort of the metrics of that. Now,
Nice.
metrics within the cybersecurity space is obviously quite often a tricky one. But there are things that we can do, certain tools that we can run to say, here was your risk before in terms of privileged access and identity security. Now that we're 3 months in, 6 months in, etc., here's that same risk surface now. And that can help to give that feeling that you are moving forward and making the right changes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Oliver. Got a few more questions coming in, which is really, really interesting. So thanks all. I think one, just to come back to, maybe I'll come to Stuart first on this, because it's a question for BT, is zero trust networking being considered for remote users. I'm not sure if you can talk to that on zero trust, but if not,
yeah, no, I can.
Oliver.
I can, and I'm happy to. I think zero trust is one of those. Oh God, am I really going to go there? Yes, I think I am. Sorry, folks. For anyone that's offended by what I'm about to say, please don't be. This is meant as a bit of a joke on zero trust. For me, zero trust is a little bit like sex when we were teenagers, right? Everyone says they're doing it. No one's really sure that they are. I think it's all a bit around zero trust at the moment. I mean, we're certainly looking at it. A lot of our new buildings, for instance, are based on zero trust concepts in that, there's no concept of trusted red side connections versus green side connections in our buildings anymore.
Okay.
We're moving away from that sort of stuff. So yeah, zero trust certainly part of the picture on TSA. And again, it kind of comes back to the way that the code of practice works, right? The code of practice is one way of doing things. Zero trust might be a complementary way of doing things that helps you meet your obligations in the regulations. If you think you're able to satisfy the regulator that a zero trust implementation helps meet the spirit and the intent of the regs, knock yourself out. I think it's part of the solution. It's certainly something we're looking at. It will not be the totality of what we do.
Okay, thanks. Oliver, your perspectives, I know you've definitely got some kind of practical advice and thoughts on zero trust. What are you thinking there?
Of course. There are always going to be scenarios where we need to permit access to users, and access and trust are big words within our organization. But there are various conditions that we can put in place such that we can provide this access in a zero trust way. So those that are familiar with CyberArk for a long time will be familiar with protecting the credentials involved and rotating those such that the user either, if they are exposed to them, it's only temporary, maybe it's a one-time password, and then it's automatically changed. That's part of it. We're not looking, yes, they may need this credential for a period of time, but we are aware that it's then exposed. And so we're looking from a best practice perspective to avoid that. As Stuart mentioned, going passwordless wherever possible, brokering a session and having the credentials injected independently to the end user such that there's no way for them to see it and it's not on their local machine. These are practical steps that we can go towards zero trust, but also more modern methods. While these are still prevalent, the things I just mentioned for sort of standing access that we can't seem to get away from, but things like just-in-time access or zero standing privileges, where we're saying, okay, someone has a regular account, which is very much in line with the TSA, but for a period of time, that person requests access, which is granted either in a manual or automatic way to specific capabilities or roles for a limited period of time. We can even go so far as to say that the account that they use is created just for the purposes of the session that they're doing. create a Windows account or a Linux account on an OS, and then that's dissolved afterwards. Okay, so there's all sorts of conditions we can put in place to reduce the risk of someone having that access within the network. But then there's another side to it, again, which comes into the TSA, which is behavioral analytics.
Okay.
Trying to keep an eye on what people are doing with their privileged access at scale is very difficult if it's a manual process. You need large numbers of people reviewing videos, reviewing logs, and it can feel sort of insurmountable, specifically for smaller teams. So having tools that can create a baseline of activity, perhaps using machine learning or other tools, see what they access and what they do on a day-to-day, and then highlight anomalous activity, that's part of it. And that can, of course, be pointed to the SIEM and other tools. But then actually being able to say, okay, this activity is anomalous. We are going to potentially suspend that activity, that session in real time, to prevent something from going wrong, even though they've been through, let's be honest about it, the various hoops that they've had to jump through. MFA, single sign-on, what they've got access to from your, however you're doing role-based access control and segmentation, through a session broker, all of this sort of stuff. If they're still going to do something that might be out of line with your security policy, you need something that can then potentially intercept or prevent the negative action from happening. Because prevention is far better than cure, particularly in telecommunications. So that's my view on zero trust and how we treat it.
Oliver, on that one briefly, I think, look, automation is going to be key here, right? We can see where things are going. Microsoft this week have announced Copilot for Microsoft Defender, right, to try and automate some of the stuff within the Microsoft domains and put some AI and some automation behind that. That sort of stuff's going to snowball, and we're going to really need to look very carefully at automation in this space, AI, machine learning, all of those sort of cool, sexy security buzzwords, so that we drive, finding those needles in haystacks.
Nice. Thanks, Stu. I guess, Oliver, Des Ward has put a question in the chat. What would you say to a customer who comes to you saying, our biggest challenge, local accounts? How would you help that customer with that challenge?
Of course, and thank you, Des. Local accounts have been a challenge for some time, and we really would look to define local accounts on what kind of system. Now, a lot of the telecommunications sort of infrastructure we're talking about is Linux. We also see an increase in Windows in certain areas, and then we've obviously got accounts out in the cloud and virtual machines. So it really does vary in terms of that answer. Now, CyberArk does have tools to help to discover local accounts and to be able to automatically onboard them into a secure location, rotate them, and allow the user to continue operating without interruption. So certainly be happy to talk more with Des and others about how we can secure things like domain accounts, cloud accounts, and of course, local accounts. The key thing is to do this in an automated way. Trying to do this manually, like with many the other challenges we've talked about, is really hard at scale.
Yeah, nice. Thanks. Just a final call for any more questions in the chat. Really happy to come to them. Frank's put a couple of questions in. I will just pick up on one if I may. And actually, just before I ask the question, it's more a reflection on the fact that this is a UK Telecom Security Act. It's applicable to the United Kingdom. But it's a framework that's out there. It's in the public domain, as it were. Anyone who's got access to the internet can read the code of practice. Therefore, there's perhaps a really interesting international perspective on what's being implemented here. And I suppose from the CyberArk perspective, do you see some of the governance and positive change that Stu alluded to? Can you see that moving across into other markets, into other places like Africa?
Absolutely. My role is to manage a team that works across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, as it happens.
Great.
And as such, we see the trends, and there are certain things that ripple out from the UK as a thought leader and something of a market leader in various areas of cybersecurity. And so we see that elsewhere. There are certain countries and regions which are still more tied to on-premise infrastructure and are more cloud averse,
Sure.
versus the UK, where perhaps we are somewhat more open to it. And so we need to obviously align our best practices and our recommendations with industry standards, and also the variances in law and sort of the legal requirements, because they can be quite powerful. If you were to look at Germany, for example, there are some really powerful rules in terms of recording a user's activity, in terms of notifying that user, but also what is permissible and justifiable. And the same applies in Africa.
Great, thanks. Stu, what are your perspectives on that kind of international picture?
So I think, look, the TSA is, as you said, Sophie, very clearly UK legislation, but I think we're definitely seeing evidence of other countries or regions looking at the TSA and thinking about what they could do, either locally in that country or regionally. I know we were part of a DSIT delegation that went out to the Czech Republic a few months ago, because they're looking at adopting similar stuff. Could they just effectively do a lift and shift? And we know that bits of the TSA are also of interest to the EU. Equally true to say that, given that the TSA was sort of genesised within National Cybersecurity Centre, lots of interest from the typical Five Eyes community, so US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And if you look at a lot of the recent legislation in those countries, it's on pretty similar lines. I think, this is the way the world's going. I don't think every country worldwide will adopt TSA as we know it, but I would not be surprised to see telecoms regulation or legislation continue to focus on security.
And there's benefit as well, isn't there? Of course, as you know, Stu, BT are an international business, as is CyberArk. Vendors are international, so there's a sort of sense of let's all move in that right kind of direction, positive change. Fantastic, cool. Look, we've got a few minutes left. I think I will just come to you both for some final thoughts and comments, and actually that kind of key takeaway you'd like to give to our audience this morning. Thinking about the TSA, thinking about what to do, what not to do, any practical steps as we sum up. So Stu, can I just come to you for some final thoughts?
Yeah, of course you can. Thank you, Sophie. It's big. It's expensive. It's going to take a lot of time. And any organisation that underestimates the TSA will, I fear, fall foul of it. But equally, I think, I've said this several times this morning, using the TSA as a positive lever for security change in your organisation is in my mind a really smart thing to do. We will all be more secure as a result. I firmly believe that. This is right legislation, even if it isn't always good legislation. My points, for sort of operators looking to implement this still stand. Get the best PM and sponsor you can. Be really pragmatic about your solutions. Don't just focus on the measures, because that way madness lies, I promise. Look around, understand the sort of concepts of what's going on across the entirety of the TSA, and then drill into your measures. And my final point, please share, collaborate, discuss with your peer networks, discuss with people up and down your supply chain. As much as I might have dissed suppliers slightly on this call, that's not my direct intention, because they are a very important part of the ecosystem, and they have their own challenges caused by the providers as part of TSA, right? Life isn't easy on their side either. I think lots of sharing, lots of collaboration. Events like this are great. techUK monthly calls are brilliant. Chime in.
Great. Thanks, Stu. Oliver, what are your kind of final thoughts as we wrap up?
Thank you. And I'll just put a slide on the screen there. I saw there was a question asking for contact details. This one here will take you to one of my colleagues in the UK who's responsible for anyone who's got queries about the TSA and how CyberArk can help.
Great.
So that QR code does take you in the right direction. But yes, it's important to say, a piece of the puzzle. We're very happy to share our experience in a sort of no obligation way on how other organizations, of course, not necessarily naming names, but you may know some of who they are, on what the best practices may be from a cybersecurity perspective from our angle, how we can help, the practical steps you can do to get started, where the kind of low-hanging fruit may be that you can use to then reduce your risk in a way that doesn't feel sort of overwhelming. One of the challenges with anything like this, any sort of cybersecurity project, really, identity security in particular, is trying to avoid boiling the ocean. We all have limited resources, Stuart, I'm sure, included. And so we've got to use these in the best possible way, and we'd be more than happy to help be part of that answer.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Oliver. Yeah, so just a reminder that on screen, and we'll of course share the slides afterwards. And if you've got any further questions for Oliver and Stuart, techUK, we're really happy to forward those on. So no problem at all. Yeah, I've just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation this morning. You know, it's been really interesting and helpful and insightful to dive into in detail what CyberArk is offering. So just firstly, a huge thank you to Oliver for taking the time to run through it with us. Yeah, it's just super enjoyable and great to see the work that you're doing in collaboration with the providers. And Stu, big thanks to you and BT for giving your time this morning. Yeah, great to see the kind of collaboration that you're leading across multiple domains and forums, or fora, I should say. So yeah, look, a couple of minutes to go. So if we can wrap up there, and hope everyone has a lovely Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.
Cheers all.
Bye.